This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 491, featuring Jack Swift, former CEO of TIFIN and Liminal Collective, and co-founder of Pacific Current Group and Sangha. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vassilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And don't forget, you can find all past episodes in our vast catalog at this point at theleadershippodcast.com.
And Jan, do you know who this episode is sponsored by?
I think I do, Darley.
Yes, they are trusted by warfighters and firefighters since 1908. Darley is dedicated to equipping our military and first responders with the essential tools they need for mission success. From fuel and firefighting pumps to drones and tactical solutions. Discover more about this incredible company and the people who serve our nation's heroes at Darley.com. That's DARLEY.com. Darley, you serve others. We serve you.
Thanks, Jim. And today we're joined by Jack Swift, a leader and an entrepreneur whose journey began as a graduate of West Point. In 2007, he co-founded Pacific Current Group. Since then, he's helped launch and scale over 20 companies from pre-seed to IPO at the crossroads of leadership, innovation, and technology. Most recently, Jack led TIFIN, an AI-driven fintech recognized by CNBC as one of the world's top fintechs, and later served as CEO of Liminal Collective. Now he advises cutting-edge AI startups, serves on company boards, and co-founded Sangha, a venture bringing leadership and spirituality together. Beyond business, Jack is passionate about exploring human potential and guiding teams through transformational growth. Hey, Jack, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Darley, for sponsoring us both or all here.
Yeah.
And let's get going.
Yeah. So you and I met via a really great nonprofit here in Colorado called Salute Colorado. And we sat on a panel together, and I thought it was just really interesting, your perspective. So we're glad to have you on the show. Before we get going, I read a pretty good-sized bio. What's not in the bio? What's not out there about Jack Swift?
You know, it's funny when you ask this question of others, it's always tempting for folks to say, you know, I climbed Mount Everest or, you know, whatever, biked across the Sahara or something. I think for me, the thing I'd like to share with the audience is a few years ago, I stopped drinking. And I think that has been incredibly clarifying for me. And so I'm not here to villainize alcohol in any way, but I think just to bring it to the forefront of the discussion here, you know, a discussion that's focused on leadership and how leaders lead. And so, you know, it was a life-changing decision for me. And I haven't really looked back. I mean, I looked back a couple of times in Mexico and the margaritas are going around. I thought maybe it's a hot day and that's looking pretty good.
Yeah.
But I haven't had anything to drink in a few years. And I just find it to be refreshingly, you know, clarifying in my decision making and how I can show up really in full presence. And it's not the choice maybe everybody will make, but it's been a great choice for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just read an article a couple of days ago. I don't know where I saw it, but it was somebody that was hypothesizing that some of the greatest times we're seeing with runners, world-class runners today, is because a lot of them have given up alcohol. You know, whereas in the 70s when the running boom started, you know, everybody celebrated with beer afterwards. And now there's a lot of world-class athletes that don't drink at all, and they're seeing different performance. I'm sure there's a lot of variables, but it's interesting they think that's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know that I was a runner at West Point, and I was fortunate to run with some of the best runners in the world. You know, guys like Dan Brown went to the Olympics twice. And I don't think there was a time where alcohol ever really helped my performance. I recall doing a half marathon in Atlanta many, many years ago, and I stayed out all night drinking the night of the race, basically, or the morning of the race. Went straight from the bars to the starting line.
Yeah.
And with a bunch of other guys who did the same thing. And, you know, we ran and we were still drunk. And we had a really good time. But one by one, everybody started to sort of, mile 8, peel off and go into the bushes, and mile 9, mile 10. There were just a few of us that actually finished that race. And I had a pretty decent time. Wasn't like ashamed of the time that I ran, but my body paid for not like one day, but like 3 weeks after that.
Yep.
So not a good combo.
Yep. And again, before we get going, so part of what you did running at West Point, you'd run the football relay all the way to the Army Navy game, right? You did that. Did you do it all 4 years?
No, I didn't do it because I was a varsity cross country runner and indoor track and outdoor track athlete. So what that means is I was racing 30 races a year. Every Friday we were someplace, racing as part of that program. It was cross country in the fall, indoor track in the winter, and then outdoor track in the spring. So I really wasn't involved with a lot of parading, which was quite kind of nice because a lot of cadets don't love to do the parade. And I wasn't involved with a lot of other support of other athletic endeavors because we were busy with track and field for West Point.
Yeah. Oh, nice. That's awesome. So, speaking of the military, that's where you started your career. Then you went into entrepreneurship, board service, advisory work. Again, going back, that's going back 30 years now. How has your perspective on leadership evolved from those early days through your mid-career and, where you're at now?
I think it's shifted quite a lot. And part of that's just been my own personal development.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about my perspective on leadership as president of my class at West Point, or a platoon leader, my early days as an infantry platoon leader, that was very much in the orientation of command and control. And, understanding, what the mission is, being able to deliver operations order and getting everybody basically to the same objective to accomplish the mission, on time. And as I progressed in my own professional development, leaving the military, and then spent 10 years as an executive for Janus Henderson, the large financial services company. The leadership there was really focused on making the numbers for the quarter because we were a publicly traded company. So it's a different orientation, and command and control is not going to work as well. You can't say everybody, you have to go do this thing. And half the group, they're civilians. Now they're going to say, I'm not doing it. Not going to happen. Or they might not say it as loudly, but that's what they would do in their actions. And so, as I moved from that more corporate orientation into being a founder, an entrepreneur, starting and building companies, again, leadership perspective shifts because now it's about influencing people not to get to the objective on time like I might do as a early platoon leader, but it's about defining, what we're working to accomplish. What is the overall mission of the company? What's the purpose of the company? It's a newly formed company. We don't know what that is yet. Mm-hmm. What are the intermediary objectives that are going to get us there? And so that's a very different style of leadership that has to be much more listening oriented than directive oriented. And I think over time, as that's migrated into, being an officer in a publicly traded company, or, being an advisor on, like I'm a board member for Lockton companies today. Lockton is the largest privately held insurance company in the world. My orientation for leadership, again, shifts through that lens, through that perspective. In summary, though, I would say that what I have learned is, first and foremost, regardless of those different environments that I've described, from military to corporate to entrepreneurship, leadership is about making decisions. Just make a decision. That's the most important thing a leader can do. And then secondarily, it's about creating alignment. Now, whether that's a alignment at a board level for a large company like Lockton, it's got 13,000 employees operating in 55 plus countries, or an early stage company that's got 4 employees operating in Boulder, Colorado. Alignment is everything. And so in seeking alignment, it's really about 2 things, and that's people and systems, and understanding, are people aligned around a specific objective? Do you have, let's say, financial incentives in place? That would be systems that help to keep that person aligned. Or are there systems that may financially incentivize somebody to do something that's not in line with the overall objectives of the company? So with that in mind, I started a few years ago really thinking about scoring performance for individual team members, not just based on hitting certain metrics or objectives, but also on cultural fit. So if you think about an XY axis, the X axis would be overall economic performance in a role, let's say, and the Y axis being how well they're aligned with the core values of a specific company. That's a different way to think about leadership, but I think it brings together or integrates what I'm speaking to, which is, understanding how aligned an individual is and how aligned the systems are in an organization towards a shared objective or a shared vision. And that's probably where I've landed today. Leaders make decisions they look for and create alignment within an organization.
I like how simple you make it.
Yeah.
I try. It gets pretty complicated pretty fast.
Well, one of the perspectives I think is really interesting. We haven't had it too much on the show, through the years, but we have had a few. But I'd love to get your opinion, as a board director, as an independent board director. First off, like, what makes a good independent board director? Like, not just good, but like an effective one in your mind?
I think in that independent board director seat, I would highlight and double underline independent. And so first and foremost, maintaining the perspective as a third party or somewhat outsider is really important to being able to evaluate the overall health of the organization. Is it healthy today? And is it going to be a healthy organization in the future? That to me is the obligation, first and foremost, of an independent director. The second piece would be in defining success as an independent board director is how well does the current C-suite align around that health of the organization today and tomorrow? And so that's, I think, again, because you're coming at it from an independent perspective, it's important that you can step into conflict and really call out what may be hard to talk about inside the organization as an independent, external board director. I think that's the second most important thing. So if the CEO is doing really well with something, being able to step in and say, "Hey, you're doing a great job, Jim. You're best CEO ever." Easy, right? And a lot of people internally will do that. When things are going south or the trajectory is slightly off, the independent board director could step in before it becomes a problem that the entire C-suite has to deal with or the entire organization has to deal with. And so I think that's the second piece. And then the third piece, and this is a newer piece, I think, for boards, and I look forward to seeing how this takes shape over the next 10 to 20 years. But I think independent board directors need to be able to look around corners. They need to be able to look into the future and anticipate what the rest of the organization has a difficult time anticipating because they're so entrenched in the day-to-day work. You got all these objectives, OKRs and KPIs, and they're focused on those things. That's great. But as an independent board director, if you can say, okay, around this corner, we see technological innovation that's going to be tremendously disruptive to what we do. We need to start thinking about that. I think that's an important part of being a board director. And again, that's different because historically board directors have been older, more experienced executives that, organizations have leaned into for that experience. I don't think that's going to be as imperative on a go-forward basis. And I'm biased and I have a whole line of thinking around this I call level 7 leadership. But the reason I feel that way is I think the rate of change is such that leaning into old ways of thinking, maybe somebody's a Harvard Business School graduate and what they learned at Harvard 25 years ago is not going to help you be successful with a company on a go-forward basis. So having independent board members that can think about where the world is going and bring that to the board and help guide the C-suite through that versus where things have been is a really important skill.
Yeah. I got a couple more questions, but one, I want to drill into the independent part a little bit. Because a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with startups, people are like, hey, we're trying to do our Series B or Series C. And, the investors want to see that all the board members participated. And, I think you can't really be independent if you're also an investor. I mean, you can be. You can be, intellectually, you can be disciplined and independent. But a lot of times it's like, I think it's nice to be able to say, listen, I got no skin in this game. At the same time, a lot of times board members are compensated with equity positions. And so, I just didn't know if you had any thoughts particularly on that, how to balance that if, you're you're trying to remain independent, but that's the only way a board might compensate you.
Sure. Yeah. I think equity alignment's really, really important. So I would fall in the camp of I'd like to see every board member have, equity incentives. And that goes back to what we were just talking about around, leaders. And, leaders make decisions, leaders focus on creating alignment. And so the alignment around the performance of the organization is oftentimes, structured in incentive compensation that involves options, equity, restricted stock or whatever it is. So I like to see that. I don't feel with that most independent directors that I'm around that the equity is so much that it's going to influence their decision. It's usually a pretty small part of their overall net worth. So it's alignment, it's incentive, but it's not going to be something that draws them into, advocating for something that's, going to be detrimental to the company because it's just not enough there.
No, I appreciate that. And I agree. Lastly, okay, you sit on boards. Based on that, what are the most common blind spots you see people falling into on the executive team that are just like, wow, this one comes up more than anything else?
Yeah, I'm involved in two distinctly different groups here. First would be larger boards where I'm involved, like Bow River Capital or Lockton, we've already talked about. And then separately being involved as an advisor on earlier stage companies where I'm working with founders and entrepreneurs as they build their company, seed, Series A, Series B, Series C. And the blind spots are different for those two groups. So group one, the blind spots that I feel are most common are really around rate of change. And the reality is this comes from a place of humans struggling with exponential growth rates. Human beings struggle to conceptualize exponential growth. And so if you're a large, well-established company that has been built over 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, it's very difficult to suddenly realize you're in a new reality. That's the big blind spot. Let's take GPT. It was launched and made available to the public in 2022. By the end of 2022, 80% of the S&P 500 was using GPT and generative AI in one form or another. And so, today that's, a billion, it'll be a billion users by the end of 2025 in 3 years. That sort of adoption rate, we've never seen with anything else. And this is just generative AI. We can get into agentic AI and all, large language models and all these different forms. And this is just AI, which is a subset of, the broader technological space. But that rate of change is very difficult, oftentimes for larger companies to get their head around. I'd like to think Lockton's doing a really nice job of embracing that. But I think that's the thing I see most commonly with larger companies is ignoring the rate of change and pretending that everything's going to stay the same. They're essentially clinging to the old way of being. And we see entire, segments of the marketplace that no longer exist because of that. Like Toys R Us, where are they? Right? A lot of big retail shops just gone. They're just gone because Amazon said, I'm going to do things a different way. And companies like Walmart listened and changed their ways and others did it. Right. So that's at the large end of the market. On the smaller end of the market, the biggest mistake I see founders, earlier stage entrepreneurs, and leaders in companies that are earlier stage companies. And this is probably all the way through to, $1 billion market capitalization, maybe $5 billion market capitalization. And that's the need to be right. That's the need to be right is the biggest blind spot that those organizations have. Now, to start a company, you have to feel very compelled that you have a good idea. And then when you get capital to back up that good idea, and that capital allows you to hire other smart people that also agree that you have a really good idea, it can drive you into a place where you think, I'm right. And the reality is that works pretty well until it doesn't. And so as a blind spot, taking the position that I want to be right, I'm going to burn capital to show the world that I'm right is a very risky way to go about your business. I think it's a much more prudent approach to be a good learning organization that iterates quickly, that learns both from mistakes as well as successes and learns as fast as possible. And so those that can iterate quickly and really deploy, what Peter Senge talked about in the fifth discipline or in presence, a learning organization mentality, they're going to be great. But those organizations that have a right wrong mentality, they're never going to get to idea flow. Well, Jeremy Utley's work out of Stanford, because there's no psychological safety. So they're not going to have the best ideas. They're not going to execute quickly. The market's going to just go right past them with the rate of change that we've already talked about. And so that's the big risk. Do you need to be right? Jan, if you need to be right, like it's going to cost your organization quite a lot. And maybe you still make it, but the chances go way down when you're running a right wrong organization versus a learning organization where it's all inbound data. And the faster you can create feedback loops and close those feedback loops and learn from what's going on in the world around you, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah. The way you laid that out ties into the question I want to ask, and that is sort of the dichotomy between being able to scale for exponential growth and the overconfidence. And so I'm wondering, as an entrepreneur early in your career, how did the challenges you faced shape the way that you look at opportunities and risks, and how you advise leaders today regarding those two extremes?
Yeah, I made a lot of mistakes. And that's really the bottom line. I screwed a lot of things up. And sometimes because I didn't know any better. And sometimes because I let my ego make decisions. And sometimes because I was relying on old frameworks that just wouldn't work anymore. And so I had some really hard lessons. So we go back to the first company I co-founded in 2007. It's a financial services company in the asset management space. We launched it in November of 2007. By 2008, we realized we're in the great financial crisis. And I'm thinking, well, this company that I thought was a really good idea, and kind of what I just took you through, we had investors and friends and family that had put money into this thing. I'm gonna have to go back to all of them and tell them I lost all their money. And I may be bankrupt personally. I may get a divorce because I was really being a crappy spouse at that point in my life. I wasn't being a great dad. And so, what did I learn through that experience? I think I learned that I didn't know better. And that I needed to learn from what was going on around me. And I couldn't blame the macro environment. I'll touch on another example of this in a second, but I couldn't blame the macro environment, the great financial crisis, for what was going and what was happening inside the company. I had to do the best I could with the tools I had in the moment I found myself in, not thinking that I knew better or that I was right, and learning from my mistakes as quickly as I possibly could. So I think that's what allowed us ultimately to build a company that was a holdco structure with 19 different companies on 4 different continents and take it public in Sydney, Australia in 2014, was getting through that. I would call it a personal growth edge that created a lot of self-awareness around, you're not right. Like, listen better and move faster and make decisions faster, because there's not just investors that are relying on you, you have employees. My brother had joined from JP Morgan. He had a great job, great bonus in working in New York. And I said, hey, come be a part of this team. And so now I have my brother a part of the team. I'm sick to my stomach thinking I got to, tell my brother he can't get paid. I got to tell everybody else I lost all their money. And I got to tell my wife we don't have any money. Like, it's a good place to learn.
So this comes up. I was mentioning we're getting ready to go on another crucible expedition, and ego always comes up out there. When's it serve, when doesn't? And to me, it's always a question about a balancing confidence and humility. Is there anything that someone could have told you 18 years ago that would have helped you learn the lesson without having screwed up? Or did you have to screw up in order to learn the lesson?
I don't know if somebody could have told me something. I think I could have learned the lesson of letting go of old frameworks before I got into a situation where the stakes were so high.
Yeah.
And embracing new ways of being. And when it comes to the ego, the way I think about it is, it's like a car with 3 or 4 seats, and 4 seats and 3 passengers or whatever. The ego mind is one of them. And it's the one that we've been trained by our current system, educational system, military system, corporate system, to let drive the car. Jim's a really smart guy. He's like, honors from Stanford, Harvard, whatever. Let him drive the car, right? He's, and his ego is all in that. Harvard, Stanford pedigree, and maybe he, built 5 companies and he's worth $1 billion, right? So let him drive the car. Somewhere in that car is also intuition, right? And instinct. And so when do you let that part of you drive the car? When do you have the courage to let that happen? Because oftentimes that's a really good partner in building companies, running business, even running military operations, is instinct. And so, I encourage leaders now to let go of old frameworks and listen to themselves. But it's the part of themselves that's not just their ego lined. It's their gut, the part of themselves that says, hey, this is a good idea or not a good idea. And I can't really tell you right now why. And if you let that part of you drive the car, put the ego brain in the passenger seat, it's amazing what happens. Because you can move a lot faster because you're now in flow, in information flow, because your ego's not like worried about being right or wrong, as we talked about. It's just learning. And an instinct moves really fast. It moves, and we know this from like tachyons and other things we see with singular, with particle entanglement and quantum physics today, that moves faster than the speed of light. It moves really, really fast. And the brain, as it adapts to that, those two start to partner really well together. You can think of it as the heart and the mind. And you start to get a balance of ego. So if somebody could help me to have the lessons earlier where I could let go of the framework that it's all about my brain, it's all about my ego, and let that dissolve and learn to listen more carefully to myself, but the part of myself that's instinct or intuition, then things would have gone a lot better.
I'm just wondering and hoping that somebody listening right now just got a master class in something of letting go of frameworks and a great analogy or metaphor that might really help them and speed up that learning. And, what's really cool is that our sponsor, Darley, they've been our sponsor for a long time. The reason they sponsor us is because of, people like you on the show that help get the word out and get people thinking of different things, that diversity of thought. And they've been around 100 years. And I guarantee they're not using the same frameworks they did 100 years ago, the same values. But we're really proud to be affiliated with them. And we know they take good care of first responders and military around the globe. And you can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
I don't think you could be around 100 years and like Darley has been and not have changed your frameworks and let go of old ways of doing things that no longer serve and embrace new ways because, they're more modern and they're more effective today.
Yeah.
100%. Jack, I'm really interested in from one perspective that you've got this experience in, insurance industry, which is, not necessarily that is terribly innovative, yet it is, and it's highly regulated. You've got experience in financial services industry, which is, only until the fintech revolution in recent years was thought of as not very innovative in any way. Also very highly regulated. And then you've got this experience with AI, which is, comparatively the Wild West. And I'm really curious about, let's say, your perspective on governance, because, governance can make, companies more durable, more scalable in some ways. It can also make them bureaucratic messes that stifle innovation in all ways. Give us kind of your understanding and take of like how to do, obviously governance is important, how to do it right. And I'd love your take on governance in the AI space right now.
Yeah, first let's define AI for this discussion as technology that creates efficiency. That's it. Does it a lot of different ways, but it's technology that creates more efficiency. And some of the industries that we've talked about, the financial services industry, the insurance industry, they're incredibly bureaucratic, incredibly complicated, and highly regulated, as you described. So there are great spaces for efficiency to be created. And that's where we started TIFIN, because we knew we could leverage AI to create efficiency. And the first company that TIFIN did that with is 55 IP. And it was around creating efficiencies as people were transitioning from mutual funds into model portfolios, and we pick something pretty straightforward: fees and taxes. That's it. Could we help millions and tens of millions and probably now hundreds of millions of people with optimizing fees and taxes with AI? Absolutely. It's a rules-based system. Is there regulation on how, dollars move as they move from one style of portfolio to another? Absolutely. Qualified buyers, all the things that we know, different types of accounts, IRAs, SEP IRAs, 401ks. But the spaces that you've described that I've played in, I feel like they touch a lot of households, right? So JP Morgan was one of our largest investors at TIFIN, remains one of the largest investors at TIFIN. TIFIN's about $1 billion company today with 300 plus employees. And JP Morgan touches 40 to 60% of the households in the United States. And those consumers will all benefit from more efficiency being injected into the JP Morgan system. Now, whether that's something like natural language search, which we were the first to bring into financial services at TIFIN, or conversational AI, which we were the first to bring into financial services at TIFIN, or leveraging, AI for donor advised funds and giving platforms. Those are lots of different ways to get to the same thing. Bringing AI in to create efficiency in a highly regulated, very bureaucratic, organization and industry. So I guess when it comes to anything that's rules-based, governance, for example, I'm exceptionally excited about what technology can do to create efficiency. And ultimately that efficiency, in my opinion, gets passed on to the consumer as cost savings. And so, as we save money for teachers in a teacher retirement system, or plumbers that are part of a Taft-Hartley program, or just an investor, a family that maybe a lower income family that's trying to save for college, I'm really excited about what happens there. And if you think about the regulatory framework that financial services has been built on, this is the 1934 Act, the 1940 Act, the 1940. These are really, really old regulations. And so I'm excited for what AI can bring to that space to reduce bureaucracy, to streamline operational efficiency, to create a regulatory framework, a governance framework that's just more efficient and ultimately serves the objectives that are more relevant today than the objectives that may have been relevant in 1934 or 1940. So that's kind of how I see things unfolding over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, there's part of me, I think this concept makes sense, but I think they're, intellectually it might seem backwards. These are highly regulated areas. And, to the degree where, like, if you were a financial advisor, you couldn't even have like a social media account until, recently. You couldn't make comments on anything. Yeah. It was just so regulated that there'd be people who like didn't even have a LinkedIn profile because they couldn't. That was just, it seemed to be stifling the kind of communication that was moving forward. But as we get into this space of AI, I actually think that it's easier to implement AI in a highly regulated space to gain efficiency, because there's a construct and a framework that says, here's where the guardrails are, as opposed to an area where there are no guardrails and it can run amok, it can run wild, and you don't quite know. AI doesn't do explainability well. You can say like, well, here's the answer, but like, how'd you get there? I don't know. But I think it's just easier, the opportunities, and it seems counterintuitive, for AI might actually be in the most highly regulated areas. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, it's machine-based learning and models work really well in systems, rules-based systems. And so, today, the level of sophistication for AI that's in market today, it's operating in some pretty simple rules-based systems, but every single day, exponentially, it's getting more sophisticated and can operate in much more sophisticated systems. Some of the regulatory frameworks that we're talking about are very complicated, but it's still a rules-based system. And so that's where machines are really, really good, because they can see, if you think about it just as a string of, constants and variables, they can see all the variables and calculate probability weightings against those variables way faster than humans can. So what might take, like a regulatory review for the SEC, let's say, it may have taken humans 6 months to do it, can be done in like 6 minutes by the right AI, the right models trained the right way. So I'm really excited. And then that doesn't even touch on the unlock that happens as more and more data emerges, that makes the systems just more accurate in doing what we've described. And then the data insights that compound on each other, because you have certain data that's like locked in, let's say a JP Morgan system that BlackRock can't see, or a BlackRock system that JP Morgan can't see. These players, or Fidelity, these players, they're now beginning to understand, and it's not really beginning. Jamie Dimon has understood this is about 2018, but that data they have is very valuable to them internally, but it's also very valuable to the marketplace broadly. So selling data insights, so Fidelity is selling data insights to another organization to layer in their intelligence layer with their own data, you start to see these layers, the stacking, create something that, again, I feel like a broken record here, that's exponential and multi-vector. So it's basically a whole new world. I mean, 1940 was a time of very linear thinking and industrial revolution orientation. If you think about that and compare it to where we are today we're in the fourth industrial revolution led by AI, and that is a multi-dimensional exponential story versus a linear story.
Yeah. Hey, Jack, I wanted to kind of switch gears just a little bit and just talk about where you sit, and that's Boulder. Not Silicon Valley, not New York, not Boston. But it's also a dynamic area known for startups and innovation. I'm wondering how that ecosystem there, the people that you're around, has influenced your approach to leadership, innovation, growth, entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Trail running, mountain biking,
Unjourney. Yeah.
uh,
And the future location of the Sundance Film Festival.
Film Festival. Yeah, it's going to be great for real estate prices, I think, for people who are sellers, I guess. I think Boulder's a really an amazing community, and it has been since really the 70s, back to running, when guys like Frank Shorter showed up and said, I think I can run a faster marathon by training at altitude. And then all the runners came, and triathletes. And then Mo Siegel shows up and says, I want to make tea, and does it with celestial seasonings. And that ends up being, hundreds of CPG companies that have come out of Boulder. And then you got Brad Feld and Seth Levine that show up and do Techstars, and they're backing 300, 400, 500 companies a year. Fast forward to today, the ecosystem is populated by both big companies. So Google has over 1,500 employees here. Apple has about 1,000 employees in Boulder County, as well as a very innovative community. So what I've seen kind of over and over again is the bigger companies come in, and then you get people that leave those companies and they start really interesting things. So Natty Zola came out of Techstars, and now he's got Matchstick Ventures, and he's one of the big sponsors of the AI meetup that happens I think it's every month, maybe it's every other month in Boulder. That AI meetup, there's 400 people there across probably 50 different early stage companies. And it's really fun to spend time with them. They're like Ian Carnes, who started free play. Ian was the head of product at Twitter. So he knows what he's doing. And so it's a really fun ecosystem to be a part of, because it's so innovative, it's so creative. And there's a sort of a Colorado pioneering spirit to both Boulder and Denver, I would argue, where the pioneers originally came here in the 1800s from a lot of different places. Boulder people come from a lot of different places. The person who's head of strategic partnerships for Google lives in Boulder, and to talk to him about what the regulatory framework around AI looks like on a go-forward basis in Europe, which he built up, Google Europe. He's a very close personal friend of mine, by the way, is super interesting. And then to turn around and have a discussion with Ian at Free Play and say, hey, what are you seeing? Is really interesting. So I think it's a place where rapid experimentation is the norm. And with people that are really, really bright people that are well-meaning and they're willing to collaborate more than some other cities in the country, because frankly, there's just less ego and there's a spirit of kind of that pioneering spirit. So what have I learned through that, through that process? It's one thing: listen.
Yeah.
Just listen to what's going on, ask good questions, and listen to everybody that you're surrounded by, because they're really innovative people in an innovative ecosystem. And there's a lot that I can learn through that process.
What would somebody that's running construction or running a bank or running a manufacturing or running some sort of professional services, what would they have to learn to do differently if they came in and were leading some of these talented people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same themes that we've explored during this discussion all apply here. Let go of old frameworks.
Yeah.
Don't think you know better. Work on self-awareness. Work on your personal growth edges. Better at you is better at what you do. Right? If you want to go sit with Jan in Western Colorado to figure that out, go do that. But all of those things apply, and people that are coming from more entrenched industries, let's say construction, they probably should know that they are specifically ripe for innovation and disruption through innovation and technology to really change what they're doing. So the best thing is to be able to, let go of how it has been done and be open to how it might be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great counsel.
I was going to ask you, you might have already given us the answer already, so I'm just going to kind of presuppose this. Like, if you were to give one piece of advice to leaders and to navigate the world today and all the uncertainty that's out there, I'm guessing you might say, listen. But I'm curious to know, like, because you mentioned something earlier about like, kind of trusting your gut more and thinking, it- you know, if listening is a good piece of advice we want all leaders to walk away with to kind of deal with uncertainty today,
Yeah.
how would we encourage people to listen, maybe not just with their head, but also with their gut? Like, is there a process you use for that or a tip?
I think you nailed it, Jim. I mean, I think it's listening with your whole body. And so the way that I guide the leaders that I work with today through that process is asking them, like, where do you feel it? Like when your gut drops because your kid is at risk or something that's going on, it makes you really, really scared. Where do you feel that? Where do you feel that the joy in your body when you talk to your mom or you hadn't seen your kids for a while and you see them again for the first time after, a month or 3 weeks or a long period of time? Where do you feel that? And that's where your intuition lives. That's where your body listening is. And so if we tie that into a framework, I'll use Joseph Jaworski's framework. He wrote a book called Source. He also wrote a book called Synchronicity. And Joseph, he was doing consulting with the largest companies in the world, going back to the 80s and 90s. And he had something called the U process. And then it's basically listen, receive, action. That's the U process. So you go on down the left side of the U, hit the bottom of the U, and then up the other side. So listen in your body, listen in your mind, but listen in your body, because your mind will start arguing with itself. But because it's logical, it's linear. Your body knows, it has a lot of information, knows. That's your gut, your instinct, your intuition. And then receive that answer. Should we go with A or B in this company? Or we're going to go with B because I feel like that's the right choice right now. Action it, and then repeat the process. So listen, receive, action. The faster you can go, the faster you'll be able to go. I'd like to leave that with, all of your listeners as my parting shot, because I personally think, and again, this is coming from a place of what I call level 7 leadership, and I'm writing a book on it, and I hopefully have published in the next few months. But that's the only way that I see humans being able to work side by side with machines in the human machine teams of the future. So think about AI and humans working together, because machines already don't have to eat. They don't have to sleep. They're operating, with fiber optics at the speed of light, literally. And I think we can do the same when we let go of knowing better and, using only our mind start listening to our instinct, and we can collaborate as really amazing co-creators with machines. Because as far as I know, human beings are the only species that can imagine an infinite number of future potentials and bring them into reality. The computer we're looking at right now was an idea once upon a time. The chair we're sitting at was an idea. You know, if it's a wooden chair, it was an acorn that became a tree that is now a chair, but it was an idea in somebody's mind. And that creative capability set is uniquely human and incredibly special. But we have to learn to listen to our whole body to be able to tap into that and keep pace with the capability set and machines that want to partner with us.
Jack, you gave us, Jim and I, and all our listeners a lot to think about. I think this is going to be one of those episodes that you, as soon as you finish, you rewind and realize I should have taken more notes.
So it's been a lot of fun spending time with you both today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Jack, thank you. It's been a treat. A lot of nuggets. There are going to be a lot of good takeaways from this one. And so we really thank you very much. For our listeners, that's all we have for you this week. You can find out everything you need to find out about Jack and his companies and his history at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor. Henry David Thoreau. It's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.